Like most war, there's seldom a definitive beginning that sparks armed conflict, but rather there are gradual and chronological occurrences of different conflicts that give rise to an all-out war. But unlike most war, where there usually is a clear enemy and usually a clear path to victory, the war you currently face is one that you've been fighting since the day you were born. Now, on that day, you entered into a world of mess, a world with the existence of good and potentiality of abundance, but a world that has been seized and usurped into being one where its laws have been methodically used against you. Now, this series, or documentary if you will, is designed to identify what the problems are and equip you with the abilities, ideas, actions, and power to win this war and position yourself and those around you to do the same. But note, some individuals do not know they are in a war, and the forces that may appear to be in power have designed it that way. Also in this series, we're not going to talk or discuss or speculate on who these forces are. You'll find that that part is ultimately the least importance, when the main focus of this series is to empower you to the point to where the who does not matter, because as you will learn, it is more of a what. Now, warning, I'm fully aware that a large percentage of you will turn away from this video. You will not like my voice. You'll be turned off by the clips I choose or how I deliver the information. There may be some of you that think that the research is incomplete or that portions seem too speculative or anecdotal. There'll be some of you that simply do not understand the ideas contained within and have no will to. It is for that reason that I've sought to make this series as simplistically written as possible. We will not delve deep into some of the more nuanced topics in science to support these claims just yet. This is simply just to lay a foundation, an introduction. This is part 1. Also, some of you will watch this entire series and do absolutely nothing about changing your current condition despite my efforts. My conviction on this being the case is strong. Why? Because you, just like myself, have been so programmed to lend your ears to empty words, mindless entertainment, and gossip that you prefer to continue in the ways that you live until you'll find that it's too late. I am literally here telling you that up front in hopes that you prove me wrong. For those that have ears, let them hear. So they say, I'm speaking to you. And to those that do not but wish to have ears, getting through this series will be the start of seeing the world from a perspective of personal power rooted in your true identity. If you can set aside what portions seem too far-fetched or out of reach for you to consciously grab a hold to. This series is not meant to change the world as a whole, but to systematically change the way you create the world in which you live, while also showing you the ways in which you can overcome some of the conflict, manipulation, and fear that gets used against you daily. At the very least, it'll make you aware of what's happening around you. Now understand first that I believe our planet is naturally and inherently neutral. It's full of beauty and wonder, but it does have a partiality towards balance. There's a need for conflict just as there's a need for peace, and sometimes the former in the current state of affairs is necessary for the actualization of the latter. The problem, though, is that efforts towards peace, abundance, and true happiness have not been made mainstream or popular in a meaningful way for thousands of years. And did you know that when you were conceived, there was a literal spark of light as a result? This has esoteric, metaphysical, spiritual, and scientific implications, which are too deep to get into in this video, but understand The perfect union of the two potential energies, masculine energy and feminine energy or balance, has the power to create life and also create reality. Let's talk about who you were before you came into this world. Simply put, your origin, like everything else in the tangible physical realm, was that of potential. You existed as potential energy before you came into fruition on Earth. The scientific definition of potential energy is as such. Potential energy is the stored energy an object has because of its position or state, i.e., a bicycle on top of a hill, a book held over your head, or a compressed spring. They all have potential energy. It's important to note that the studies of physical science through the first law of thermodynamics has touted that energy can neither be created nor destroyed. It can only be converted from one form or another. And it is no different with you. In essence, you are the purest form of that which is inside you currently. You existed in a moment or a series of moments as absolutely anybody, anything, and nothing all at the same time. When you were born, you still existed in this state up until you started to have new sensory experiences in a totally new environment. And it's at that moment you begin to change. But what exactly changed? What changed the simple fact that you were pure potential? What changed the fact that you existed as everything and nothing at the same time? I'm going to say this and say this carefully. Nothing. Absolutely nothing changed this. But your environment, your experiences, and your perceptions of them influenced you to decide that you'd rather believe that you were no longer an energetic extension of the Creator, the Source, God, or the Architect, whatever you want to call the entity and power by which all exists. Once I conceptualized it this way, it helped me understand what it meant that we're all connected. If we all at our core origins existed in this way, everything and nothing simultaneously, then we quite honestly are all the same. So what environmental occurrence or experience initiated this change? Now, before I answer this, we can't ignore that DNA and genetic factors contribute to how you internalize these experiences and how you navigate this realm. Science has proven that, but be informed that science has also confirmed more recently that we can even change those DNA and gene expressions through a branch of science known as epigenetic. There are other factors that come into play that can change your characteristics and your personality through meditation and mindfulness, but we'll talk about that in a later video. I just add that to point out that to a small degree, there are some factors that come into play that aren't necessarily of your doing. Now, when it comes to the word birth, the first war waged upon you was that of emotional trauma, really trauma in general. Now, understand that we'll be primarily dealing with the denotative or literal definitions of keywords that tend to have a heavier negative connotation. So what is trauma? Trauma is a deeply distressing or disturbing experience. Being birthed is no doubt traumatic. If through natural means your head was compressed to squeeze through a 10-centimeter cervical canal, which is approximately a 4-inch opening. If through a C-section, you would have possibly experienced a slow but ultimately minor decrease in vital functions due to anesthesia. And then you'd be pushed into an abrupt introduction of bright, blinding light. And in both cases, if you're not already screaming in absolute disarray, you'll be pinched, slapped, spanked, and poked until you do. But no worries, this is all to make sure that you are okay. But no one asks, are you? The problem is, are you okay? You're clueless. You went from pure consciousness to all of a sudden being crammed into a meat suit. Your vitals suggest it all as well, but we have no way of knowing how you internalize these events. You have no clue how to use your limbs, your hands, your feet, or even how to think. You have no clue what's good for you outside of the nervous man and the teary-eyed, exhausted woman that's holding you to her chest. And if all of this isn't bad enough, just as the hectic pace of birth settles down, you're carted off into a room where you're served a needle buffet of chemicals and medicine before you've even heard your first name. Maybe you weren't born in a hospital and you were left at a fire station alone. Maybe you had the perfect setup and you were born in a tub of water, seamlessly being introduced into the world with open arms. It matters not how you came here. You experience trauma in part or in whole, and in your own way, internalize that experience. And this shaped not only how your perception of the world was, but began the shaping of the perception of yourself. So in other words, you went from being one with the Creator for 9 months, give or take, which is your true identity, to assuming the role of the creation, which is a perception that places you outside of the power that you were born with. So in seeing that this is how it all began for us, it's easy to assume that we'd see more forms of trauma and we'd face more forms of trauma in life. Whether that be from witnessing conflicts between your parents and friends or experiencing death of a loved one for the first time, in every case you made a decision to internalize those events in a way that helped you shape your perceptions that served you or harmed you. I noted earlier that trauma coincides with your emotional health. This is important because emotions stem from experiences, and from these experiences, our physiological chemistry causes us to feel a certain way. The flow is simply this. Event occurs, physiological chemical response. As a result, there's an emotion, and it ends in an external or an internal reaction. Now, the question is this. Knowing this, and knowing that I'm not the only person that knows this, why is it that virtually all forms of media, at one point or another, expose us constantly to repetitive forms of emotional trauma? Why do our movies, sitcoms, music, and quite possibly the worst of them all, our news channels, seem to only focus on showing us varying degrees of trauma, emotional trauma, misfortune, fear, and lack? Which, as you can see in your daily life, just living, through this repetition, it only gives rise to conversations with our peers that by default furthers deeper discussions on said events. I'd like for us to move from trauma itself to talking about what trauma most notably produces, and that's a state of fear.